Good morning, and thanks for joining me today. My name is Christina Cosgrove Rooks, and I am a manager of special projects at the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency. My unit currently oversees the program implementation of the Nonprofit Security Grant Fund. This morning, we're going to be providing information regarding the post-award process. While we will be providing you with guidance on how the post-award process works, additional information related to program implementation and fiscal requirements can be found within PCCD's applicant's manual and standard grantee subconditions. As an awardee, it is essential for you to familiarize yourself with these documents to ensure that you're in compliance with PCCD grant requirements. Today, we'll start with a brief overview of PCCD in case you're unfamiliar with us. We will then discuss quarterly program and fiscal reporting and project modification request, otherwise known as PMRs. Additionally, we will briefly review the types of monitoring that may occur during your project and finally provide some helpful hints to ensure the success of your project. Since many of you may be unfamiliar with PCCD, we wanted to give you a brief overview of the agency. PCCD was established in 1978 through Pennsylvania state law and serves as the Commonwealth's justice planning and policy making agency. Our mission is to enhance the quality, coordination, and planning within the criminal and juvenile justice systems, to facilitate the delivery of services to victims of crime, and to increase the safety of our communities. We are directed by an overarching commission board, which is advised by 8 different advisory committees and 2 training boards. PCCD's responsibilities and programs fall into a number of different areas, including funding and grants, technical assistance, data and research, victims compensation, and training, among other responsibilities. If you're interested in learning more about these areas, I encourage you to check out our website. Here's just a quick snapshot of the types of programs we support. The Nonprofit Security Grant Fund was established in 2019, and funding has been allocated within the adopted state budget every year since. If funds are included in this year's final state budget, we plan on releasing another round of funding in early fall. Again, congratulations on receiving a Nonprofit Security Grant Award. Some of you may have already been awarded, and some of you probably are still in the process of working through the eGrants application process. As a reminder, a grant is not considered officially awarded until the signature page is electronically signed and submitted back to PCCD. Once PCCD receives the award letter, you are ready to begin the project. We are now going to provide an overview of the post-award process. However, as we stated earlier, more detailed requirements of managing your grant can be found within our applicant's manual. Procurement. Procurement guidelines must be followed for all grant purchases. A micro purchase is the acquisition of supplies or services where the aggregate dollar amount is less than $10,000. A small purchase falls between $10,000 and $250,000 with relatively simple and information procurement procedures. Most of the funds under the nonprofit account will fall under this small purchase threshold. The purchasing threshold applies to monies budgeted and or paid to a single vendor, not just a single line item. For example, if your $5,000 line item for security cameras and your $5,000 line item for lighting will be provided by the same vendor, you must follow the small purchase procedures as the line items add up to $10,000, which falls within the small purchase threshold. And just a note, a proposed formal advertised or competitive negotiated procurement for which only one bid or proposal is received is deemed to be a non-competitive procurement. If this occurs, a PCCD sole source approval must be secured. Just reach out to your fiscal contact listed in your grant for assistance as special rules may apply. So now we'll just talk about a little bit about quarterly reporting. All subgrantees are required to submit quarterly program and fiscal reports throughout the life of the grant. Since these grants began on January 1st, 2025, the first quarter will end on March 31st of 2025. Your first quarterly report is going to be due on by April 20th. So the program report provides PCCD with an overview of the activities that have occurred. The fiscal report is a separate report, and it's where you will input the expenses paid during the quarter so that funds can be reimbursed. Grantees also have the option of submitting interim fiscal reports during the quarter to receive reimbursement sooner. Let's take a more detailed look at the program report. In e-grants, a program report can be generated 5 days prior to the end of the quarter. Once a report is created, you will be required to answer if the project is on schedule or not, and discuss why the project may not be on schedule. A separate section is also provided so that you can let us know what activities occurred. For instance, if you were still obtaining quotes during the first quarter, you can just let us know that you were getting quotes, and maybe provide a sentence or two about what you're going to be doing in the future. The other two sections that are standard on these reports, and are not required, but their status must be set to complete before you're able to submit your quarterly report. So if you want to provide pictures or stories about your project, feel free to do so. Put those in the attachment section on the report. There are no performance indicators assigned to these grants, so all you have to do within this section is go into it and save it as complete. During the first quarter, you're also going to be asked to certify that everyone listed on your grant and e-grants has viewed this presentation. You'll also be asked to provide a code word that will be mentioned during the webinar. This section will only be present for your first quarterly report. All right, so now let's go into fiscal reports. In e-grants, a quarterly fiscal report can be generated up to 5 days prior to the end of the quarter. An interim fiscal report can be submitted at any time if you would like to report purchases prior to a quarter's end. An interim report can be useful if you want to get reimbursed for purchases sooner than waiting for the quarter to close. Before creating and submitting a fiscal report, be sure you have everything you need. You'll need a list of purchases that fall within your budget and e-grants. You can only report expenses against the line items in your approved budget. That's really important to remember. You'll also need invoices provided by your vendors for goods or services rendered. An invoice must be dated within the project period, and the invoice date should fall within the quarter in which you were reporting the expenses. Lastly, you'll need to provide proof of payment to your vendor. Examples of proof of payment include an itemized receipt, an invoice from a vendor regarding payments made toward the balance, or a deposited check image. So this is what a fiscal report looks like if you're unfamiliar. To help avoid needing to revise your fiscal report, which would in turn delay any reimbursements, please be sure to keep these important reminders in mind when creating your reports. Be sure to report your actual expenses. Your reported expenses should match the amounts on your receipts and invoices. Do not just report the amount that you have budgeted for any particular line item. When you created your budget, we consider that to be your best estimate of future expenses. Your fiscal report should outline your actual expenses. We do expect to see some fluctuations between your budgeted amounts and your reported amounts for any given line item, so that's okay. If you have a cash match requirement as part of your approved application, you must spread out your cash match throughout all of your fiscal reports. You cannot solely request state funding, nor should you report less than your required cash match percentage. Cash match requirements are either 33% or 50%, depending on the amount of your state award. As a rule of thumb, your cumulative cash match must amount to greater or equal to your budgeted cash match percentage of your grant. A 50% cash match is very easy to calculate, while a 33% cash match can be a little tricky. To help with computing a 33% cash match for a fiscal report, a math tip has been added to the bottom of the slide. Be sure to include invoices and proof of payment as attachments. You can also include any other supporting documentation you would like. Sometimes, if you have a lot of expenses on a single report, it is a great help to create and submit a spreadsheet that briefly outlines each purchase and which line items the purchase corresponds to. Remember, supporting documentation helps BCCD determine if your report can be approved and reimbursed. Help us help you by providing us with everything we need to clearly understand and follow your expenses. Be sure to follow procurement guidelines for all purchases. Totals in both tables as you can see on this page, need to match. You physically cannot submit a report if the totals don't match. If this happens, you'll receive an error message in red lettering at the top of your report that explains this. Remember, obligations are things you were invoiced but have not yet paid. Essentially, these are things you are on the hook for, so to speak. Only use this column if you've been invoiced for something you have but have not paid for yet. Be sure to include the invoice for any obligation listed in your report as well. For step-by-step guidance on creating and submitting a fiscal report, be sure to check out our fiscal report walkthrough guide on our website. Here is an example of supporting documentation that can be provided to help PCCD staff figure out how your reported expenses align with your eGrants budget. This is especially useful in cases like this where a single invoice contains multiple different items that span across several line items. Providing similar documentation is likely to greatly reduce our review time and minimize the need to return reports due to confusion or inability to match up expenses. Time and effort reporting is essentially how you will keep track of the hours worked for positions budgeted under the personnel section of the grant. If you have a personnel budget, you are required to submit time and effort reports as an attachment to your fiscal report. This documentation should clearly outline how much time the employee worked and how much time is being reported against the grant. Included in the time and effort reporting should be the employee's name, the dates and hours worked by the employee, the hours dedicated to grant activities, the employee's signature, and a supervisor's signature. All right, now it's time to talk about project modification request, or what we call at PCCD PMRs. So there may be occasions in which a modification is needed to your budget or program to improve the effectiveness of grant activities. For the nonprofit security grant funds, this may include a change between budget categories. For example, if you budgeted $10,000 for cameras and $15,000 for consultants, but you ended up spending only $5,000 for installation, and the actual cost of the cameras ended up being $20,000, this would be a change between the supplies and operating expenses line item and a line item within the consultant category that exceeds the 10% threshold. In this case, a PMR is needed. PCCD does allow small changes to the original budget if they directly relate to the approved expenses. In our previous example, a grantee may have realized that new wiring was needed for the installation of the cameras. A PMR could be submitted to reduce the cost of the cameras, and a new line item related to the wiring and installation of wiring could be added. We highly encourage you to reach out to your program staff first, however, before adding any new line items to ensure that they will be approved. If you end up needing additional time to spend the funds, a PMR must be created to extend the end date. With any PMR, it must be submitted several weeks prior to the end date, since PCCD must process these before the grant ends. Unfortunately, any PMRs that are not submitted, reviewed, and sent to the comptroller's office prior to the end date are not allowed to be awarded. So this is really important for you to understand and to remember. All right, let's talk about fiscal accountability and monitoring. It is important to maintain fiscal accountability throughout the life of your grant. Fiscal accountability when it comes to managing a PCCD grant includes only reporting expenses that are in your approved budget and doing so against the appropriate line items, providing backup documentation for your expenses as required, maintaining an accounting system that tracks revenues and expenditures for each PCCD grant separately, submitting timely fiscal reports and only requesting actual expenditures for reimbursement, and cooperating and providing all requested documentation if your grant is selected for fiscal monitoring. So PCCD monitors grantees to ensure that grant funds are expended in accordance with the approved grant budget and that the grantee complied with relevant federal and state regulations and guidelines. Additionally, PCCD monitors to ensure that the project is implemented as described in the application and is achieving the appropriate and expected results. On a quarterly basis, PCCD randomly selects grantees to monitor. PCCD staff may also request a program to be monitored if there are concerns with how the grant funding is being spent. Grantees that are identified as higher risk based on past monitoring or the newness of the agency may be monitored more frequently. If a grantee is unable to provide appropriate documentation to support expenditures or program operations, they may have their funds put on hold and their risk level elevated. If you're selected for monitoring, you will receive an email that provides instructions on what line items are being monitored and the time period. It is important that you respond to these requests as soon as possible with all the required documentation. So finally, we just want to highlight some of the important requirements that we have seen over time that um, that may, that's just really important for everybody to remember as they go through. You may be seeing a theme here, but reviewing the applicant's manual and standard subgrant conditions will provide you with all of the requirements that you need to meet. Abiding by these requirements minimizes the chances of your agency ever having to return funding back to us. Next, only request reimbursement for funding listed within your eGrants budget detail section. If you are unsure if an expense can be reimbursed, please contact your program and fiscal contact listed within eGrants. Third, attach all invoices and receipts to your quarterly fiscal report. This assists you with keeping track of your documentation and allows our fiscal staff to process reimbursement quickly. Please make sure that all your quarterly program and fiscal reports are submitted in a timely fashion. And last but not least, please update all contacts in eGrants to ensure that PCCD is able to get in contact with you. The eGrants system can only email the addresses listed within the system. In addition, please note that we are only able to discuss grant information with individuals listed within your application. Due to security reasons, we are unable to provide information or answer questions related to your specific grant application with outside staff. If you have any additional questions on what was presented today or need assistance throughout the grant period, please reach out to your program and/or fiscal contact that's listed within eGrants. We're always here, happy to assist you. Thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day. And on your program report, your first quarterly program report, please note that your code word is cameras. Thanks.